All right, welcome back to the Net to Net podcast. I know it's been a little bit, but we're back. I'm excited to be back. I know we took like a couple like a month off in December, just with the holiday break, and then I ended up getting sick the first week of January for the first couple weeks, so wasn't didn't have the energy to be able to do this, but feeling better. But we're back. So today's episode is college football offseason. We're looking towards the offseason and then going into the 2025 season. Unfortunately, with being sick and being on break, not having my stuff, not being able to kind of elaborate over the college football playoffs, the bowl games, and everything, just to highlight from the last episode that we did college football, previewing those games, calling the game between Michigan and Washington. I knew those two teams were going to make it. I did pick Washington to win. Unfortunately, they did not get the dub, but I knew that they were a better team than Texas. It was going to be down to whoever has the ball at the end of the game. The Michigan-Alabama game, that was shocking. I thought Bama made some mistakes at the end of the game and then just couldn't contest to that defense of Michigan. Michigan has one of the best defenses in the country at the time. And when you have a defense like that, that was, I believe, Michigan, they were the number one points against. So having a really good defense like that, that will show. And the big news happening over the offseason, transfer portal. It's what college football is now. I know a lot of coaches don't like it because you're playing a year at a school, then you're building your stock up, and then you're gone the next year to a bigger school. Nick Saban's had issues in the past with it. He does not like it. Speaking of Nick Saban, he ends up retiring, and we're talking about a legend of the game, Nick Saban. We actually had like huge moves in that sort, but we talk about a legend in Nick Saban coaching career. Yes, he had some stints in the NFL that didn't turn out, but he is mainly known for his college football, what he did at OSU, what he did at Bama. And just to highlight some of the things he did, everybody pretty much knows 7 national championships, 11 SEC championships. He the Bear Bryant Award, 2 years coaching, which is shocking, which I'm shocked he didn't get more. Same with the AP Coach of the Year. He was only a 2-time winner, but that was his time at LSU, and then he's a 5-time SEC Coach of the Year. With a bowl record of 19-12, with a 9-5 in the college football playoffs. Pretty good. I believe that pretty good stats. Overall college record 292 wins, 71 losses, and 1 tie. And if I'm not mistaken, but he has been all but 1 year since the college football playoffs has been a thing since 2014. He has made the college football playoffs all but 1 year, and that was in 2019 when they finished second in the SEC West to Georgia. They squeezed in at the end of last year. Everybody knows the dramatics of Alabama getting in and Florida State missing out. We know what happened there. But yeah, Nick Saban retires. An incredible coaching career. Probably one of the best coaches of all time. Probably the best college coach of all time. And we think about this. Nick Saban has had a winning record at Alabama after his first year. Never had a losing season after that. His first season came in 2-6, 1-4 in conference, and then ties for third in the West of the SEC, and wins the Independence Bowl. And then after that, it's winning record after winning record after winning record. One of the best coaches of all time. He's done it for a long time. I think he's like 70, 72. So what a coach. And now talking about his replacement, Kalen DeBoer. Kalen DeBoer comes over from having a 15-0 record with Washington this last season, and finishing the year 14-1. That one loss coming in the national championship against Michigan, losing 34-13. They beat Texas in the conference semifinals 37-31, beating Texas twice in a row. They finished this 12-0 in regular season, and then end up winning against Oregon 34-31 in the the last Pac-12 championship game. Again, beating Oregon by 3 points. That's 3 points. That was a huge win for them. In my case, he gets a Pac-12 championship. His overall record, 104-12. He's 2-1 in bowl games, and he's 1-1 in the college football playoffs. And don't forget that he's 17-2 in NAIA playoffs. So a little background. He came over. He started his career at Senex Falls. Became the coach after being assistants on Senex Falls for a little bit, and then from 05 to 09 becoming the coach at Senex Falls at NIA level, and then having multiple stops in college at Fresno State, Indiana, and then takes over Fresno State as the head coach in the pandemic year. Has an okay year, goes 3-3 in his first season, and then after the pandemic goes 9-3, and has good wins over UCLA and San Diego State. Then in 2021, takes over at the University of Washington and brings in Michael Penix Jr., where they have had success when he was the OC at Indiana. Penix puts up great numbers his last 2 years in college, MVP, Heisman season, falls short of Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels in third place, or second place, sorry. So had a great season. Kalen DeBoer then goes over and signs with Alabama, becoming the next coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide, and he's got big shoes to fill. He has huge shoes to fill. You talk about Nick Saban, Bear Bryant, probably the two most important coaches in Alabama football history. So let's see what he can do in the transfer portal. Let's see what he can do in recruitment. And he said in his press conference that recruitment is the foundation of Alabama. Alabama is based off of recruiting. That's what Nick Saban has done for so long. That's what Bear Bryant did too. And then you also have to kind of adjust and adapt to the way that college football works now with NIL and the transfer portal, like I mentioned early in the beginning of the podcast. The NIL transfer portal, it's pretty much you play a year, build your stock up, go to a bigger school, or go to an even bigger school within a Power 5 conference. So, yeah, there's so much movement going on in the transfer portal right now. We have a lot going on, and I'm excited to sit here and talk to you guys about it. Also, to give my way too early top 10. So let's dive right in, and then we'll kind of touch on the transfer portal with who to watch right now that's still available that could be signed later on. And there's a few guys that are still out there that we'll talk about that are undecided. But yeah, so yeah, I'm ready to jump in. So the first of my way too early top 10 has to be number one, Georgia. Georgia coming off being number one all year long, losing a tough loss to Bama in the SEC championship. Talk about they were number one. They were 11th in uh, total passing yards. They were 21st in rushing and points. They were fifth in the nation, ninth in defense. They are losing a ton of people. But they're also bringing in a lot. Key losses is Dewan Edwards at the running back position, Ladley McConkey, Dominic Lovett on the offensive side, and then you have the likes of uh, the defensive leaders in camp, Kamari Leicester and Javon Bullard. But we talk about probably the biggest name that you were losing. That was your entire, pretty much uh, your biggest star in Brock Bowers, the tight end. He's probably going to be a top 5 pick, top 10 pick in this NFL coming up in the NFL draft. He is my number one tight end on the board. You lose something like him, and you lose your two receivers in Ladley McConkey and Dominic Lovett, who stepped up big when Brock Bowers was out those couple weeks. Can Georgia rebound? I think yes. The people they brought the number one cornerback in the country in recruiting, Nyland Green, to replace, and AJ Harris to replace some of that. They're losing those guys that hopefully they can bring back in because they kind of need to regroup. You lose those guys. You're losing a ton of transfers. Like I mentioned, you lose Nyland Green, you lose AJ Harris, you lose Marvin Jones, Jamin Dumas Johnson transfers to Florida State. You lose these key veteran guys, so you now need your guys to step up. And we talk about people that you bring in. You bring in you bring in players like a London Humphreys to kind of from Vandy and a Xavier McLean from South Carolina to kind of help you balance out the team, bring in that veterans that have played here in college football, and then help you kind of develop and become better. You bring in like I said, you lose a Dewan Edwards at the running back position, and you replace him with a Trevor Etienne, the younger brother of Travis Etienne, electric running back. What we saw out of, he wasn't used correctly at Florida. He was behind a couple other running backs. And we talk about the way he was used. He's like Trevor Etienne. Trevor Etienne is like his brother. He reminds me, watching his highlights, watching his tape, watching him last season, he reminded me of Travis Etienne. What he did at Florida, 753 yards on the ground with 8 touchdowns. He averaged about 5.7 carries a game. And he can do it in the receiving game as well. 21 receptions for 172 yards, averaged 8.2. Didn't fumble at all. He's very good with the ball. He can bring something just as a check down for Carson Beck. And talk about Carson Beck is coming back for another year. So we'll see Carson Beck play a big role. Yes, you bring in the likes of London Humphreys and Kobe Young to kind of replace those players that you lost, like a Laddie McConkey, a Brock Bowers, and a Dominic Lovett. And then the way that we'll look at it, yes, you're losing a few of your offensive line in the likes of Warren Brents, who could be and a Xavier Trust, who are top draft, could be second and third round draft picks in this NFL draft, especially Warren Brisson. But you are able to keep the likes of a Amaris Mims coming back for another year, Cedric Van Brown, Tate Ratledge, Dylan Fairchild. You have that core of players on your offensive line that can protect Carson Beck and be that stable on that offensive line. And then we talk about the defense. You lose, like I mentioned, you lose a lot of your key veterans, Javon Butler, Kamari Lanster. But you still have Tyreek Smith, who was there last year. You have Small and London at the inside linebacker position playing the mic. You have Jalen Walker. And then you bring in these guys that can help you play on the defensive side. And we talk about, and I talk about bringing in Justin Williams from Justin Williams in recruiting. You bring in a bunch of these recruiters. Justin Williams, 5-star linebacker, number 9 in the country, number 1 at the position, number 2 in the state. You bring in a KJ Bolden and Eliza Robinson to help you replace those guys you missed. Georgia goes out and gets 3 5-stars. They get a good amount of 4-stars and 3-stars that help you recuperate what you've lost in losing in the draft and losing to graduation and losing that eligibility. And then you pretty much kept their coaching staff in line. They didn't let anyone really leave. Kirby Smart, there was rumors out Kirby Smart's out at Georgia. He's in Tuscaloosa now. He's not leaving. It would have to take a lot to get him out. Yes, Will Mumshut is taking a step back as your defensive coordinator, one of your co-defensive coordinators, but you bring in a Tavares Robinson from Alabama, who he's been there for a little bit at Alabama, and you in the likes of having a Dallas Turner, a Chris Braswell, and even before that, Will Anderson Jr., Byron Young, Phil Mathis. You had so much good talent at Bama on the defensive side. You come and bring that experience in, try to teach those young players how to play. And then we talk about the schedule next year. SEC, tougher now getting Texas and Oklahoma. Kind of crucial games to watch out for Georgia. Georgia starts the season off at Clemson against Clemson at home, and then they get Texas Tech, Tennessee Tech, and then after that it's SEC. You hit Kentucky, Bama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Texas, Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee, UMass, and Georgia Tech to end the season. It's going to be a very competitive SEC next year, I think. I don't think yes, you can say Georgia is the number 1 team in the country. Do I think Georgia will win the SEC? Yes. I think the way that what's happening at Bama, which I'll get into in a little bit, is going to say why Georgia is going to win, but you never know. You're getting a strong Texas team that's joining the SEC for the first time. And I'll talk about them in a little bit, but they could give Bama and Texas could be right behind Georgia, and don't even forget about Missouri. Missouri had a great year, and we'll also talk about them in a little bit. So now transition to my number 2 team. My number 2 team, way too early, has to be Oregon. It was a tough decision between Ohio State and Oregon, and I went with Oregon because what Dan Lanning has done since losing to Washington shows that he's ready to compete. Yes, Oregon's losing Bo Nix, one of the best passers in college football last year. He had 45 touchdowns and added 5 more on the ground. He threw for over 50 touchdowns. He was only sacked 5 times. That shows how good their offensive line was. You're losing the likes of Bo Nix, Bucky Irving, Troy Franklin, who Troy Franklin was probably our best receiver to ever play at Oregon in the history of Oregon. What he did, setting multiple single season records in yards and receptions. He looked amazing. He was great. And then you lose the defensive side. You lose the likes of Brandon Bortles and Evan Williams to the draft. And kind of losing those role players and losing a Brian Addison or a Trizzy Bridge, losing Kyrie Jackson to the draft. But then you respond by going out and getting Dylan Gabriel, who threw for almost 50 touchdowns, or 40 touchdowns, sorry, as your starting quarterback. And then back it up by thinking about your future and getting Dante Moore, who was originally committed to Oregon this season, but decommitted and flipped to UCLA. Now you're getting a really good 5-star quarterback that has good promise, but needs time to sit behind a veteran presence like Dylan Gabriel. Just screams, we are building for the future, and the president. Then you go out and top that by getting one of the best safeties, probably the second best safety in the transfer portal. He was the number one at the time, Kobe Savage, out of Kansas State, to replace Evan Williams, a ball hawk, hard hitting senior out of Kansas State. And then we go, okay, well, now we bring in a Jay Harris out of Northern Western Missouri. To help replace the production of Bucky Irving. We also get a Noah Whittingham back, Jordan Whittingham back, and getting Jordan James that's going to step up in a bigger role at the running back position to replace that production that we got from Bucky Irving. And then how do we replace a Troy Franklin? Yes, we're able to bring back Tez Johnson. Gary Bryant is going to play for another year. And what we go out and do is we get Trayshawn Holden back, and we go out and get Evan Stewart. Evan Stewart, the number one receiver in the transfer portal. Yes, 4 touchdowns last season for 515 yards, 14 yards. He was a freshman. Now he's a sophomore. He's learned. Texas A&M was a madhouse. He's coming over to play at Oregon, where we've seen players become great receivers here. Troy Franklin was one of those. And he brings in the help kind of take the edge off of Tez Johnson and Trayshawn Holding and Gary Bryant, because now you have to look at, oh, crap, we have Tez Johnson on one side, Evan Stewart on the other, Trayshawn Holding in the slot. How can we handle all these guys? We can't. So you're going to have to double team one, and that leaves someone else open. So that's going to take pressure off of both. Evan Stewart will take pressure off of Tez Johnson, and Tez Johnson will take pressure off of Evan Stewart. And then, yes, we missed out on a couple big defensive ends that I wish we could have gotten, like Walter Nolans or Prince Moulier. But we get Jordan Birch back for another year. We bring in a Matthew Bedford on the offensive line, a 6'6", 307-pound offensive line. We bring in Jameer Caldwell from Houston. Had a great senior season last year. Hopefully he can recuperate. I wish we got Trey Moore. But then we bring in a Cam Alexander to help on the defensive side for the production that we're going to lose from Shaziq Bridge, Kyrie Jackson leaving. And then hopefully we can do something. I know we're still trying to figure out who's going to play center next year, with the fact that we are losing Jackson Powers, who was an unanimous All-American center this year. Great. We're also leaving Stephen Jones, another veteran on our offensive line. But then I know we are still in the hunt for Jabari Muhammad out of Washington. It is down to us in Texas. Hopefully he is visiting. His last visit is this week at Oregon, so we have the final say. Hopefully we can walk out of there and say, hey, come to us. You've seen how we play. Join that culture that Dan Lanning's making. And then in the recruiting class, bringing in an Elijah Rushing, bringing in an Adrian Breedland, 2 big name players to add to this defensive culture that we're putting in. Yes, and then not to forget that Oregon has freaks all on each side of the ball. We talk about, like I've already talked about the offense. Now, if you talk about the defense, yes, you lose a Brandon Dorless, a leader, but you have a Jordan Birch that's still a leader there. You have Mateo Ungalele, who we saw flashes of last year that can step up in big moments. We probably one of the biggest retains we got is bringing back Jeffrey Bassa and Justin Jacobs. Both of those guys at the middle linebackers just pick up where they left off. Jeffrey Bassa, I remember when he was a freshman playing safety with our stacked linebackers when we had Noah and when we had Noah and we had Justin Flau. Jeffrey Bassa, great guy, great player there, great guy. He's a leader. He shows what he can do. And then on the cornerback side, yes, Dante Manning stepping up in a big moment. Hopefully he can take that bigger step and be able to guard those number one receivers on these powerhouse teams. But you get a Cam Alexander who, redshirt senior, he's experienced. He knows how to play. Same with Nico Reed. Hopefully he can take the next step, and so can Jelani Florence. We saw flashes of all these guys. I wish we were able to keep Bridges because I think Bridges would have helped. And then on the safety side, yes, bringing in Kobe Savage is amazing. Keeping Tysheem Johnson is also a big keep. But bringing in Jabbar Muhammad, if we can bring him into this defensive backs room, we'll be set. Luckily, we were able to keep Will Stein. I thought Will Stein was going to leave, but he has said he's not going anywhere. Tosh Lapoy is a great defensive coordinator. Hopefully, he stays for another year. But both of these guys could be on the way out by next year. Looking at the head coaching job, we already lost Drees Martins, who took a job at Michigan State because his son transferred. But Oregon, I love what they're doing. Key games, we got the Civil War rivalry, the third game of the season on September 14th. Can't wait for that. Cool. So glad that they kept that rivalry going. And then pretty much the big games, October 12th, Ohio State comes to Eugene. And then later on November 2nd, Oregon travels to Ann Arbor to play Michigan. And then there's end the season, they play Washington at home. It's going to be a fun season watching Oregon. They're in the Big Ten now, so hopefully I have them as the best Big Ten school right now other than Ohio State, but it is close. It is close. Speaking of Ohio State, I have them at number 3, and I just love what they're doing. Retaining so many of their key starters, the likes of J.G. Tuamalu, Jack Sawyer, Tyreek Williams, Cody Simons, Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, Latham Ransom, Trayvon Henderson, and Buka. That just shows how dedicated they are to a program, how dedicated and loyal they are to Ryan Day, showing that Ryan Day can retain these guys to make another run at a national championship. And we talk about there's the unfinished business. There is unfinished business. These guys have been here for 4 or 5 years now, and they have not beaten the team up north. That is their main goal. You come to Ohio State for 2 reasons: play for national championship and beat the team up north, which they haven't done yet. And honestly, last year with Kyle McCord as a starting quarterback, that was not going to happen. They actually now have a chance because of what Ryan Day and his coaching staff has been able to do. They bring in the likes of Will Howard. We're talking about a guy that is a Big 12 champion. He has a Big 12 champions to his name. Last year, he was very good. He threw for 24 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He also ran for 9, and he caught a receiving touchdown. He is he's very good with the ball. He's very smart with the ball. He knows when he makes the right decisions, which is pretty good. He was number 22nd in QBR rating this year with a 75.1%. He's very accurate, 61% on the season last year. You bring him in, and then because he gives you something that you haven't had since probably Justin Fields, and that is a quarterback that can do something with the ball when the play breaks down. We talk about, CJ Stroud could kind of run the ball, but he wasn't that great at it. Not like a Justin Fields. Will Howard has the type of skills that Justin Fields had. When the play breaks down, instead of just trying to throw it into double coverage or throw the ball away, he can produce something with his legs. And we've seen it before at Kansas State. He brings that dimension that they haven't had. And then shocking enough, Donovan Jackson comes back for another year. Josh Simons comes back for another year. Carson Hintzman comes back for another year, but there is a chance that he loses his spot to Seth McLaughlin, who had a great season at Alabama, starting all their games, barely getting to Jalen Milrose until the end of the season. I think he comes in and steps in. And then you talk about, like I said, yes, you keep those guys, but then you go out and get Caleb Downs, the younger brother of Josh Downs, who's in the NFL for the Indianapolis Colts. Joshua Downs, sophomore, safety, can slot right in, so you don't have to play Jordan Hancock at safety. He can play back in the slot, and now you have Caleb Downs running your at the safety position. ball hawking safety, hard hitter. We saw what he did at Alabama this year. He is a first all team SEC, freshman all team. Brings so much dimension to the team and helps your and he stepped up big ways. Yes, you did lose a lot of your depth to the transfer portal. Um, excuse me. Um, and like the Evan Pryor, Chip Tatum, Julian Fleming, Mayan Williams, just to name a few that have left in the transfer portal. But then you go out and bring in like an Aaron Nolan for the future. You bring in Jeremiah Smith, the number one recruit in this year's draft class, 5-star, getting him to replace Maserati Marv. Yes, Marvin Harrison is probably your biggest loss. He was holding out pretty much at the end, losing. Yeah, Kyle McCart's not a huge loss because you replace him, but losing a Michael Hall, yes, but you were able to retain a Tyreek Williams, Still Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg. That's probably where the most problems you're going to have is in that second layer after you get past the first layer into that linebacker. It's probably going to be linebacker by committee unless you see a lot of Caleb Downs playing sub linebacker, which is a possibility. He did that a lot at Alabama. But yes, Maserati Marvin Harrison Jr. Losing him is a big loss, and then bringing in, yes, you lose that production from Marvin Harrison, but hopefully Jeremiah Smith can uh, step in right away with Mbuka. You bring in Mayan Graham, the 4-star recruit out of Indiana, to also help as well to replace kind of that Julian Fleming role. But then Carnell Tate, we saw a lot of flashes of him in the bowl game. Not a lot, just because there wasn't getting a lot of throwing. My two things are with Ohio State is how do you replace three things actually. How do you replace Marvin Harrison? And that's going to be committee with Mbuka, Carnell Tate, Mike Grant, Jeremiah Smith. What will his safety blanket look like without Cade Stover being there? You have G. Scott still. You bring in Will Karamek from the University of Ohio. He is a 6'6" freak athlete. He's huge, built, big frame. Throw the ball up there, he'll go up and get it. And then how can the linebackers of Cody Simons, Sony Styles, J.J. Higgs, Arvell Reese, and Gabe Powers do? We've seen a lot of flashes of all these guys in spring and in certain games when they're blowouts, but can they step up to the plate? I know Cody Simons can. I know Sony Styles can. Can the rest step up? And it will be a linebacker by committee. And I'm very excited to watch this year's college football season because all the moving parts of the Pac-12 moving into the Big Ten, the Big 12, so on and so forth. And then probably something that will take pressure off of Ryan Day of the call playing is bringing in Bill O'Brien. Bill O'Brien, the former OC of the New England Patriots. There was a question if he would stay in New England with Gerard Mayo's coaching staff or will he leave with Bill Belichick. He leaves and he comes back to college. He has coached some of the best college football players and NFL players, Deshaun Watson, Bryce Young, Mac Jones. With Bryce Young ends up winning a Heisman, finishing top 10 in scoring in offense in both Brian's seasons when he was Bryce Young's coach, and averaged 39.9 and 41.1 points per game in those two seasons that he was the OC. He also has a good coaching record at Penn State when he was there. He had Tracy McSorley, and he had Sean Clifford, and then in the NFL with Deshaun Watson and Mac Jones. So look for him to be something big. Jim Knowles in his third season, you saw a top 10 defense in the country last year from Ohio State. That's the Jim Knowles effect. Brian Hartline's still there, coaching those receivers, one of the best receiving coaches in college football. So don't rule out Ohio State being really good this year. I like what they did in the transfer portal, and I like what they did retaining those key veterans because I think they were just a quarterback away last year from winning the big game and making a run in the national championship. They were a quarterback away. They had everything, and I like what they did. So going to my number 4 team, talking about it, the team that could give Georgia a run for their money is Texas. Texas, retaining Quinn Ewers is a huge thing. But outside of that, they really are losing a lot of players. They are losing the likes of Adonis Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Jonathan Brooks, Tavon Sanders, Christian Jones, Trevon Sweat, Brian Murray. Those are some key veterans and leaders that you had on your offense and defense. And you're losing a lot of those guys. But I like what they did. They bring in Andrew Mbuka, Mubuka from Clemson, the strong safety. You bring in an Isaiah Bond to try to and Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden to kind of replace that production that you got out of Xavier Worthy and Adonis Mitchell. My big question is how do you replace Jonathan Brooks? And I thought he kind of saw that in kind of the last few games of the season and going into the college football playoffs because Jonathan Brooks went down so early in the season. We got to see what it was like without him, and it was kind of a committee between the likes of C.J. Baxter and Jaden Blue, kind of carrying the load. And I thought they didn't do a bad job. It's just it's hard to replace that speed and that production that you got from Jonathan Moore. So their offense still looks shaky. Yes, they lose. They bring back Quinn Ewers, but their backup quarterback Malik Murphy transfers to Duke, which now that if he does go down and Quinn Ewers has not had a full healthy season, um, you now have to rely on Arch Manning to kind of be that backup. And we've seen him struggle. And we remember last year in the spring season, hopefully he took that next step. But in that spring season game, he threw like 9-10 picks. And he didn't look good. So hopefully he took that next step and takes this next step in the offseason. Some big news, losing a couple of their coaches. Their D-line coach Bo Davis goes over to Brian Kelly's staff at LSU, and then they lose their co-defensive coordinator Jeff Choate to Nevada as the head coaching position. So hopefully they were able to kind of they were able to promote Jonathan Nason, bring in Jonathan Nason as their co-defensive coordinator. But they're still looking for a defensive line coach. There is a few contenders out there, the likes of Rod White out of Houston or Texans in the NFL, but then you also have Freddie Roach, whose coaching future is up in the air just with everything going on at Alabama, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then the likes of Mike Elston out of Michigan, who had a great year with that defensive line team. So I have them at 4 just because of what they did in the playoffs and somewhat stronger than some of the teams that are coming back into this. Their biggest pickup was Trey Moore, getting Trey Moore on the defensive side. I thought he was going to Ohio State, but ends up committing to Texas. He is from Texas, San Antonio area. Played at UTSA. Redshirt sophomore, had 14 sacks, 15 and a half 15 assisted tackles, 30 solo tackles on 45 tackles, had an interception, a forced fumble, 3 defensive pass breakups. I like what they bring in. He can bring some edge that they are losing in Byron Murphy and Trayvon Sweat, some of those big name guys. I really do like to pick up on Sly Bolden. Watching him at Oregon State, he was very electric, very good. And then bringing in a Kendrick Blackshear, who has that experience, that senior out of Alabama, and Isaiah Bond, actually bringing in 3 Alabama guys that have experience and can bring that veteran leadership to the team, especially an Isaiah Bond and a Blackshear. They've been to the college football players before. They know what the likes are. Same with Andrew Mabuka to help with that. And then you get a Cody Black, a Ryan Wingo coming in the recruiting process. 5-star recruits. Probably their biggest one is Simon's, the 5-star linebacker, who can come in and start right away when you need. And we talk about a team that struggled offensively. They weren't the best. Talk about points. They were 16th in the country. Defensively, they're 13th in the country. they struggled to run the ball when Jonathan Brooks went down, and we saw that. So hopefully that running back by committee can step up in a bigger way, in a more bigger role. So now going to round out the top 5, I have Bama, and it's Bama. The reason they're there is just because of Bama. Right now, there's a lot of stuff transpiring going in with a new coach. This is pretty much a new coach and a new coaching staff. Kalen DeBoer comes in and wants to bring in all of his new staff. Actually, probably the coach that has been there the longest now is Freddie Roach, and his future could be up in the air because we've seen a lot of movement. So before we get into anything, we'll start with the coaching staff. You're talking about you're losing a lot of the coaching staff left. Like Travaris Robinson goes to Georgia. Joe Cox leaves for Ole Miss. You have Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator, retire. You have Holman Wiggins go into Texas A&M, and you have Coleman Hutzler headed to Mississippi State. I haven't replaced him yet. Kalen DeBoer does bring in his offensive coordinator from Washington, who we kind of all thought that was going to become the next Washington coach, but it just wasn't meant to be. So they bring him in to Bama. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The amount of Alabama players they're losing and the amount of players that have graduated and then a lot of them entering the transfer portal. And then we kind of talk about the guys that are leaving. Now you're Kalen DeBoer, your first year at Alabama, and you're losing Dallas Turner, Justin Mboga, Kool-Aid McKinstry, J.C. Latham, Terran Arnold, Chris Braswell, Jermaine Burton, Jace McClellan, and Jalen Keys. That's 8 starters from your SEC championship team that have decided to go to the draft. Then you lose a bunch of your players. Caleb Downs leaves for Ohio State. Christian Storer leaves for Kentucky. Julian Sayans leaves for Ohio State. The early commit. You lose Tyler Buchanan. He transfers to Notre Dame. Back to Notre Dame, but to play a different sport. Trey Amos leaves to Ole Miss. You lose Isaiah, like I said, you lose Isaiah Bonds. Des Ricks left to Texas A&M. Kendrick Blackshear left, and then you lose one of your best offensive tackles outside of J.C. Latham. Caden Proctor goes to Iowa. So you're losing a ton of players to the transfer portal. About 30 leave. Yes, you go out and get a Damani Jackson to help kind of staple that Band-Aid that you lose from a Jalen Keys and a Kool-Aid McKinstry. And he was productive at USC. No interceptions. He had 3 defensive breakups. He was kind of a lockdown corner. You didn't really get thrown to his side that much. Then you go out and get an LT Overton out of Texas A&M and a Naquil Bertrand out of Texas A&M. Yes, you bring in a few guys that don't have that experience, but LT Overton can help kind of bring that defensive presence that you're losing in Justin Mboki in the middle. And then you have your recruits. Now, your recruits have kind of like I said, you're losing a Julian Sayin to Ohio State. You have Jalen Mbuika coming in at the cornerback position. You bring in Cadence Jones. Like, you're still recruiting well. Now it's, do these guys want to stay? And it's kind of, like I said, this is a too early thing. So way too early predictions, because Alabama players have 30 days since Saban retired to transfer out. So now you have all these recruits coming in and be like, I wanted to play for Saban. Now he's retired. How can they do this? And like I mentioned, this is a team that is now in a weird thing. It's like, you lose all these players. You have a new coach. How will they respond? They have to win games. The likes of Jalen Milroe staying, Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice have to step up. And then their young guys have to step up too as well. You're bringing those starters back. The nice thing is about this offensive line, you're bringing back 3 of your 5 starters. And then you have James Brockmeyer, Miles McVan, just name a few, to come up and start in there as well. Then on the defensive side, you are bringing back a couple of your defensive ends and Jamie Otis and Tim Kean to step up in that next stage. You were able to retain Damian Payne, the younger brother of Deron Payne. You have Tim Smith still. You bring in an LT Overton. You have some starters. Now it's your back end and you're running in your linebackers and your cornerbacks. You don't have a ton of guys coming back from that starting team. Malachi Moore is coming back, but he has that injury history. So hopefully he can stay healthy and get some production from Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurley, and then those early enrollments in Jalen Mbuka, Xavier Mincy, and then the son of Dre Kilpatrick Sr., Dre Kilpatrick Jr., a former Alabama legend. Hopefully he can be like his dad and play some lockdown corner like he did for 4 years. And then, like I said, bringing in Damani Jackson helps. But it's really going to see how can Kalen DeBoer you get this team to where it needs to be from a Saban-esque and a Saban team. Because this is not Saban's team anymore. He did say Saban's going to have access to the team. It's just how much it's going to be more of he's not running the show anymore. So this is going to be interesting. They got a tough schedule, a decent schedule this year now. You got Kentucky, you have LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi State. So it could be a hit or miss. And then they have those cupcake games of Furman and Middle Tennessee, which they'll kill. But no mercy. Thank God, because that was so bad to watch that. But yeah, this should be an interesting year. Sorry, I read the wrong thing. Sorry, they do play Mercy at the end of the season, which is stupid. But you got Oklahoma, Auburn, LSU, Tennessee, Georgia, Wisconsin. You got 2 easy games against Western Kentucky and South Florida, but then you're at Wisconsin, then Georgia, then Vanderbilt and South Carolina, who've always been hit or miss in the conference, especially Vanderbilt has been really bad. Then you have Tennessee, who's hit or miss. Then you got Missouri, LSU, Mercy's going to be a win, and then Oklahoma, Auburn in the Iron Bowl. So it's definitely going to be tough competition for Bama. So I love to see it. Keeping it in the SEC at number 6, I got Ole Miss. Ole Miss has done probably the best, other than I would say Ohio State and Oregon, the third best in the transfer portal. They were able to keep the likes of Jackson Dark at the quarterback position, which is very good. Lane Kiffin did a great job this year, taking his team to 11-2, 6-2 in the SEC. Lane Kiffin, tremendous job. What he did in the transfer portal, bringing in Walter Nolan, bringing in Prince O'Malley, bringing in Antoine Wells, who was a really good receiver at South Carolina before getting injured, bringing in Tyler Barnes, bringing in Jakert Scott, Key Lawrence, Chris Paul Jr., Deion Smith, just to name a few, to replace some of those guys getting out the door in. Quashawn Jennings headed to Ohio State, Cedric Jones and Jeremiah Jean-Baptiste headed to the NFL. You bring in these guys that have production. Deion Smith, 12 touchdowns at JUCO. So hopefully you can take that next step. You bring in the likes of Chris Paul, a defensive leader on the linebacker side. Lewis Moore, 3 picks last season, 3 forced fumbles, 1 touchdown. Had an unbelievable shutdown corner. You bring in a veteran like a Gene Scott from Southern Mississippi. One of the biggest prizes bringing in Prince Wally, 7 sacks last year, 39 tackles, and then Walter Nolan's the big prize, 4 sacks, 37 tackles, can come in right away and give you production on that defensive line. And Lane Kiffin loves that offensive guru of his mind. Having a complete defense to help with his offense is going to be great. You bring in Logan Diggs to replace to kind of hopefully replace that production. 7 touchdowns at LSU last year for 119 carries for 653 yards to replace that loss that Judkis had, that leaving to Ohio State, and then going out and getting Trey Amos from Alabama, a defensive back that can help in that secondary that you've lost. So I like what they did here. Lane Kiffin's doing a great job. He's recruiting well. A bunch of 4 stars, bringing in 5 stars. Kamari Franklin on the defensive end to help pair out. You think of Kamari Franklin, Prince O'Malley, and Walter Nolan. That's going to be a fierce 1, 2, 3 punch on that defensive line for Lane Kiffin. They were able to keep a lot of their players. They have a decent schedule, like I said, for them. Middle Tennessee, Wake Forest, Georgia Southern, Kentucky, South Carolina, LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Georgia, and Mississippi State. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in this offseason if they keep going through the portal like they have been doing. But I have them at 6. I feel like they're going to be really good this year, and they're going to pick up where they left off. Number 7, I have the defending champions, Michigan. And the reason I have them here is because they are losing so many key players, especially Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh is leaving. He's pretty much going to the NFL at this point. He's taking interviews. He's gone. You lose a J.J. McCarthy. You lose a Blake Corum. Donovan Edwards did say he's coming back. Larry Darius Henderson, Trevor Keegan, Zach Zinter, Drake Nugent. Those are 4 of the 5 starting offensive lines. Then you lose Roman Wilson, your best linebacker, your best receiver. Then you lose a Junior Colson, a Michael Barrett, a Mike Standstill on the defensive side. That's a lot of pieces that you have to bring in. So far, they've only brought in Jermaine Barham and Josh Preble, an offensive line guy they can slide right in, and then bring in Jamar Barham from Maryland, who had a decent season at linebacker. He's a junior. He's got experience. He can come right in and hopefully bring that production back that Michael Barrett had. Now, with Jim Harbaugh leaving, I think they go in-house and hire Sherrone Moore as their head coach. I like what he did in the interim position. I think he should get a chance and will get a shot at the coaching job. There are not that many good coaches in college football that are available right now. You've seen all the big ones leave, like Mike Elko, Kalen DeBoer. I don't see like a Mike Norvell coming. They gave him a new contract. They gave Stark a new contract. They're not leaving. Jimbo Fisher's out there, but I don't think any team wants to touch Jimbo Fisher with what happened at Texas A&M. This will be an interesting year. They will probably rely on Donovan Edwards on the offensive ground to run the ball a lot because these guys, Tyler Morris, Frederick Moore, we haven't really seen a lot of. Jaden Degnell is going to be the probably slot to start the season with J.J. McCarthy leaving. Losing a bunch of your offensive line, yes, you bring in a Miles Hilton back, a Giovanni Hadid back. Like, these guys have experience, but not a lot of them do. A lot of them are rotational guys, so this will be kind of their first time really starting. And then it's that defense stuff. Yes, you have Will Johnson back, the MVP of the defensive MVP of the national championship. You bring him back. But outside of that, like I said, you're losing Junior Colson, Michael Barrett, Mike Strill. So how do you replace that production? You're going to be relying on a lot of incoming first years that aren't proven in college football and can struggle. So hopefully Michigan can figure that out. But right now it's kind of just like, who's going to be the coach is really what Michigan's doing. And I have them at 7 just because they don't know who the coach is. It's a lot of inexperienced players, but they're the national champions. So I think they deserve to be in the top 10 still, but towards the end. Number 8, Penn State, which I was back and forth between Michigan and Penn State being 7 and 8. I went with Penn State just because they weren't the national champions. They are losing key players, but they did bring in key players. Talk about people that are leaving after going 10-3, 7-2 in the Big Ten. James Franklin's back for another year. Can Drew Allard make that next step? Drew Allard threw for 2,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But there was games that he was barely throwing the ball. He could barely throw the ball with that pressure. So hopefully he can take that next step. You retain a lot of your players like a Noah Singleton, Nick Singleton. You bring in a Julian Fleming. You have Kendandre Lambert-Smith back for another year. Your offensive line is pretty much intact outside of Ole Fashun, the offensive tackle that it will be a top 5 pick in the draft. Yes, you do lose Chomp Robinson. Yes, you do lose Adrees Isaac and Curtis Jacobs, your leaders on that defensive side, and not to mention Cade Wallace on your right tackle. So you're down 2 now, your tackles. They did bring in Noah Rookie from Wisconsin, who hopefully can play next year. We didn't really get to see much action. We saw him last year at Wisconsin. Hopefully, he can bring that to. They replace. They actually go out and get 2 cornerbacks to replace Kalen King, and Johnny Dixon, and AJ Harris from Georgia, and Jalen Kimbers from Florida, who are fine cornerbacks. I like Jalen Kimber. He's more of a slot guy. AJ Harris will be out in the boundaries, kind of being that Kalen King replacement. And then bringing in Julian Fleming, like I mentioned. Hopefully he can get back to the production he had when he was first couple years at Ohio State. I like that they brought in Quentin Martin to kind of take some pressure off of Nick Singleton. Bringing in Donovan Harbor, offensive guard. In the recruiting portal. He can also play out tackle, so it could be a swing tackle if needed. Just to name a few. They were able to keep a lot of their coaches, and then hopefully they get that same production out of Abdul Carter. Yes, he's going to get more attention drawn to him just because there's no Chop Robinson, there's no Adrees Isaac, so he's going to take more of those double teams. So hopefully that makes it better for like the likes of Danny, Dennis Sutton, Donovan Ellis, Kobe King to step up in those times where he's going to get double teamed. My thing is, I think they did a real good job at the cornerback position, bringing in the Jalen Kimbers, having Cam Miller still either AJ Harris, retaining Jalen Reed and KJ Winston at the safety position. They have one of the best defenses in the country. They showed why they were one of the best defenses in the country last year, and third in points against. I think they continue on that cycle of being a really good defensive team. It's just now, can the offense take that next step? Can Drew Aller take that next step into becoming a good quarterback in Penn State, following in the footsteps of Sean Clifford, a Trace McSorley, who had success when they weren't great their first year at Penn State. And in all means, Drew Aller did not have a bad season. 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 2,000 yards. It's just the inconsistency wasn't there. Or the consistency wasn't there. There's so much inconsistency we saw. He got sacked a lot. He couldn't really produce with his legs when the play was broken, like we've seen other quarterbacks do for Penn State. Now, number 9, I have Notre Dame. I like what they did. They bring it. Yes, you lose a ton of your receivers. Like, they lost Rico Flores, who had a decent year. Braylon James left. Tobias Merriweather left. Chris Tyrese left. That's a lot of your receivers. Then you lose Audric Esime, Joe Alt, Javon Jean Baptiste. Sam Hartman leaves. Cam Hart leaves. Blake Fisher leaves on your offensive line. So and Matt Sirianni leaves. So you're losing a lot of your players. Then you lose a few of your coaches. You bring in a Mike Denbrock from LSU, a Mike Brown from Wisconsin, to kind of replace those coaches that you lost, in the likes of Chazzy Stuckey, Gerald Parker. How do you go out and do that? So the first thing is you need a quarterback. You need someone to lead your offense. You go out and get Riley Leonard. I like Riley Leonard. We didn't get to see a lot of Riley Leonard. He got injured early. He wasn't that productive because of the injuries. He was out for a while, having multiple injuries. But I think he fits. He screams Notre Dame. He fits right in to being that next quarterback. Then you go out and get Cam Williams, Boix Collins, and Chris Mitchell in the receiver position to replace those 3 receivers you lost. And they all were pretty productive. Chris Mitchell was very productive, had 7 touchdowns for 1,000 yards over at FIU. You bring in a veteran like Bo Collins out of Clemson, that slot cornerback, 3 touchdowns, gave you 510 reception and 38 receptions. And then you go out and get the likes of Jaden Harris from Marshall, who's young, still has time to be in a bigger role. Yes, you lose a bunch of your defensive players, like I mentioned, but going out and getting Jordan Clark, they're probably, other than Riley Leonard, Jordan Clark out of Arizona State had a great year at the safety position. He can kind of be that quarterback of the defense. I like what they did on kind of the recruiting process, going in and getting 4-star CJ Carr out of Michigan, and then getting Tabron Beanie Powers Powell out of Westchester, Ohio, who can come in right away. You go out and get a Carson Hobbs out of Cincinnati, at a Moeller, who's known for producing those big college players, and then Micah Gilbert out of Charleston, North Carolina. I think he can come right away and be a productive receiver for Riley Leonard. I think Riley Leonard, if he had the type of receivers that he has at Notre Dame, I think he'd been even more productive last year if he wasn't injured and had the talent around him. My biggest thing is how do they replace the production of Audric Estime? You have a Devon Ford, you have a Jaden Price, a Gian Brian Payne, but Audric Estime was probably one of the best running backs in the country last year. He was small, but he could run, he could move, and that's my biggest thing. Notre Dame is big on running the ball. If you don't have someone that can run the ball, then you're kind of stuck, because then you have to throw the ball out, and then teams can pick up on that, and you want to have that balance. So hopefully Marcus Freeman can do something and get that team going. Yes, you bring in Al, you promote Al Golden to your defensive coordinator due to their former defensive coordinator. I'm forgetting his name right now. But he took the job at Duke University. He's the former Miami. He's the former Miami coach. Why am I forgetting his name? Because he did a pretty good job at the defensively for Duke. Manny Diaz, the former Miami coach. He's a really good defensive minded coach, and you bring in Al Golden, who has had defensive coordinator position before, but can he replicate what Manny Diaz and Marcus Freeman had in store for that Notre Dame defense? And you have the likes of you still have Junior Tuli Kalana, Tuli Gomaka. You still have Joshua Burnham, who still can give you that presence. You have Kuna Akia, who I thought would probably go to the draft, and then bringing in the likes of, you have Xavier Watts still, Jordan Clark hopefully can play a bigger role on this defense. They are very young at the cornerback position and safety position, so hopefully they can do something there. But yeah, and then lastly, at the number 10 position to round out my top 10, early top 10, hopefully I can have the top 25 out later. I just want to do my top 10 just to get started. I know it's just a lot of talking for me, so just coming back from being sick, it's a lot to do, so I didn't want to. So I thought an hour would be okay. But to round out the top 10, I'll make it quick. I got Missouri. I like what they did. You showed a lot of promise in the bowl game against Ohio State. 11-2, 6-2 in the SEC. I love Brady Cook. I thought he was very good this season. 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. But they really only lost. I would say their biggest losses are Chris Abrams, Drain, who's going to be a first 2-round pick, and then Cody Schrader, their running back, going to the draft, and even Tyree Hooper, a Marcus Correll out of Georgia State, who ran for 1,350 yards, 13 touchdowns. Hopefully, you can come in and be that production that Cody Schrader had. You keep Brady Cook. You keep your head coach Elijah Drinkwitz, who I thought did a tremendous job since he's taken over the program. Brady Cook's there for another year. You get Marcus Carroll. You have Theo Wheat and Burden still, Luther Burden, the third, who played very well this season. And then you keep that core on the defense and offensive side too, that can push to even improve, to even push for an SEC championship, because of what's going on at Alabama, what Georgia's doing right now, losing a lot of people in the portal. Ole Miss they do have to compete with Ole Miss. They'll have to compete with all those guys. So hopefully we can see a lot of improvement, taking that even bigger step, especially in a 12-team playoff. You're going to see a lot of teams make it with 1 or 2 losses. I think all 10 of these teams can make the playoffs. And then just outside, I would probably have, if I did 12, my goal was to do 12, but I thought 10 was good enough for now and then I can release the rest of it. But I do have at 11, I think Utah is at 11, and then at 12, I like what Florida State can do. I think bringing in DJ Uiagalelei, I like what Mike Norvell's doing at Florida State. They're committed to him. They bring in Cameron Davis. They bring in Jonathan Davis, Marvin Jones on the defense side. Yes, they lose a Keon Coleman, Trey Benson, Jordan Travis, Johnny Wilson, Jared Verse, but hopefully they can bring in some former stars and in the transfer portal, and hopefully some of these guys can step up big. I like what they did bringing in Marvin Jones Jr. His dad was a All-American at Florida State. Bringing in DJ Uiagalelei to replace the Jordan Travis at the quarterback position, and then I like at 11 with Utah because we get another year of Cameron Rising and Brandon Kuth, and we've seen them very good. They're both very good players that can do the job. My only thing is, how do you replace that speed on your defensive side at safety with Sion Faki, who could do both on the offense and defensive side? So hopefully they find someone at safety that can kind of bring back that speed and that defensive leadership on that side. And yes, they are losing a bunch of their starters in their secondary. They lost 3, like I mentioned, Sion Vaki, Cole Bishop, and Miles Battle, as well as backups Javarius Broughton. But I will talk about those in the next episode and even more. Just to leave it on the end note of the transfer portal, there are a lot going on. Probably the number one transfer that is still available right now is probably Jabbar Muhammad. He is still out there. Julian Saban pretty much signed with Ohio State, so he's pretty much off the board at this point. But you still have Lance Hurd out of LSU, offensive lineman, probably headed to Tennessee. Jabari Muhammad, who I mentioned earlier in this episode, I think he goes either to Texas or Oregon. I think Oregon gets the final say in that one. Rashard Amos out of Miami University has a chance of being picked up as a running back. And then Jameer Grizzly, Alabama's fourth signing in the 2024 class, but he won't suit up anymore for the Crimson Tide since he entered the portal due to the coaching leaving. So that is a 4-star right there that you can go out and get. And then not even to mention Washington's Will Howard, who pretty much committed to Washington. And then once Kalen DeBoer leaves, he goes and re-enters the portal. So now Will Rogers could be headed somewhere else. It'll be interesting to see where he goes and what players need him. That this is pretty much an overhaul of a lot of players leaving from Washington, like Asa Turner, Jabari Muhammad. Hopefully Asa Turner. Honestly, I would love if Oregon went after Asa Turner because I think he could be something there in that kind of like speed that Oregon could use in the safety, losing a Evan Williams. But it'll be interesting to see where Will Roger goes because I thought he was going to go to Ohio State before he committed to Washington because I thought he would be a perfect fit in that air raid with those receivers, but he ends up not. So it will be interesting to see what goes on. So yeah, that kind of wraps up the episode today for football episode. You'll probably be hearing it on Monday or Tuesday whenever I get it out. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. I know Caleb is sick right now and Casey is unavailable today, so hopefully we can get some college, more NFL, soccer back up and running, and college basketball and NBA as well. So hopefully we get those back up soon. It's great to be back. Hopefully you guys enjoy this episode, and I'll see you guys soon. Peace.